Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Darien Library's event this evening. We are so happy to have you all here virtually. Before I introduce James and Rob, I'd like to thank the Friends of the Darien Library for their support of all these terrific programs. Tonight's program is James Rickards in conversation with Rob Embers. James is an investment advisor, a lawyer, an inventor, an author, an economist, and has held senior positions at Citibank Long-Term Capital Management and Caxton Associates. He is a New York Times best-selling author with 6 books to his credit: Currency Wars, The Death of Money, A New Case for Gold, The Road to Ruin, Aftermath, and his latest, The New Great Depression, with this terrific cover. It has made the bestseller list for the Wall Street Journal's business books, and it is also on Publishers Weekly bestseller list this week and last. Jim is also an editor of Strategic Intelligence, a financial newsletter. He also is a long-term resident of Darien and now makes his home in New Hampshire. And let me just give a quick little intro on Rob, and we'll get to the real fun. Rob is our moderator for the evening, and he is also a cybersecurity expert and consultant who works with companies to assess their security needs. Rob is a member of the advisory board of CREST, Council of Registered Ethical Security Testers, and a regular media contributor. We would like to thank both gentlemen for giving us their time this evening. Please type your questions into the Q&A and we will answer them at the end of the program. So let's welcome James and Rob.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathleen, and thank you to the entire Darien Library team for putting on this event tonight. I'm particularly excited to have this conversation with Jim. I've known Jim for a number of years, not just in the capacity as his son-in-law, but also as somebody who enjoys his books and somebody who I've got to know well. So, as Kathleen mentioned, you're an award-winning and acclaimed writer. The New Great Depression, The Winners and Losers in the Post-Pandemic World is your 7th book in around 10 years. What impresses me about all of your books is the way in which they're written. You do not need a degree in economics to understand them. I think what I'd love to know is, what is your process when you look to write a book and research, and how do you portray that to the everyman to be able to read it and take it on board?
Well, thank you, Rob. Thanks for the introduction. It's great to be with the audience of the Darien Library. As Kathleen mentioned, I happen to be coming to you from Northampton, New Hampshire, but I lived in Darien for 35 years, so feel this a little bit of a homecoming to be doing an event for the Darien Library, which I've done in the past. We've done live events with the library. This one is virtual. The whole world seems to be virtual these days, but happy to be with the group, and I'm sure welcome our audience. I'm sure I know some of you personally, but if not, we probably cross paths in Darien somewhere along the way. Well, that's a great question. It's actually one of the hardest questions I've been asked.
Right.
If you ask me to do, forecast the economy for 2021, or the path of the depression, or how the virus relates to the economy, those that I can do. But the creative process, which is really your question, is a difficult one. This book, I will say, was a little different than the other books I've written, in the sense that it was there was a great deal of urgency about it. I got a call from my agent last April, and of course we all know April was in the middle of the first lockdown. Turns out there's been a wave of the virus from November until early January that was worse, 10 times worse in terms of caseload, and almost twice as bad in terms of fatalities. But that was in the future. Last April, we were all locked down, we were all quarantined. I don't have to kind of revisit that period. We all lived through it. So everyone's familiar with that. But the phone rings. It's my agent. She said, "Jim, the publisher wants a book on the pandemic, but particularly on the economic aspects of it." And then we ended up with the title, "The New Great Depression." I can explain that, but the impact of this on the economy, because that's what my other books were about, and that was my strength. And they think you can write it. And I said, fine, I'll put together an outline and we'll make a presentation and go from there. But she said one thing: this book, they want it on the shelf July 15th. So this phone call is around April. I'm a bit of a procrastinator. I happen to think there's some benefit to procrastination, but That aside, I can take my time on things, but they were saying, in effect, if you want the book in the bookstores in July, you basically have to be done in early June at the latest, which meant that I had to write this in about 6 weeks versus 2 years for some of my other books. So I knew what that meant, but I signed on. I said, sure, let's do it. And this obviously there's enormous interest in it. There's a sense of urgency. This is a book that people are going to want as quickly as they can, because they just want to know what's going on. And I say that in all of my books, but this one in particular, it's not that you can solve every problem in the world. It's not that you can say, here's the answer to this, here's the answer to that. You don't have to do that. If you can just shine a light on things, describe the facts, explain them, do it in plain English. And by the way, when we say that the book's accessible, you don't need a PhD to read the book. You absolutely do not. But it is PhD level material. My point is, you can present. I never dumb things down. I do write in plain English. I do use metaphors. I do explain things, but it's very high level stuff written at not a low level, just a plain English level. I try to avoid jargon, and we've had a lot of success with that. We've really broadened the audience. So it's written at a high level, but it's written in a way that just anybody can pick up. You don't need to be an epidemiologist or an immunologist or virologist or a PhD economist to get it. And I'm a big believer in that. I think that 90% of what all the experts do is just jargon, and there's not much that they do that can't be explained, as I say, in plain English. So I signed on, and I said to my wife, look, here's the deal. For the next 30 days, I'm going to be the most antisocial person you ever met, because you just have to, sit down and write and do the research all at the same time. But so the good news is, when I'm done, we'll have a book behind us. And I did do that. I did deliver it in June. Then by then they said, well, we're thinking of moving this to October. There was still the urgency about the book, but they felt that there was a little more time as far as that was concerned. It was just too much to get it out the door that quickly. And the thing about books is it's a tangible thing. I mean, you can have a digital book, you can have a Kindle, you can have an audio book. Those are downloadable. But if you want a hardcover, we have one right here. It's got to go to the printers. You need paper and ink and printing and truckers and distribution and boxing and warehouses, and there's a lot to it, and the lead time is fun. So they said October. I said fine, and we proceeded from there. It was pretty much done by July. But then around September, I get a call from my publisher, and they said, Jim, we think we're going to have to bump this back to January. It actually came out January 12th. I was a little disappointed about that at the time. But the reason was interesting. I delivered on my end, and my publisher was good to go. So as far as author and publisher were concerned, everything was on track. The bottleneck were the printers. There are only 2 or 3 major printers for the top 5 publishers. I'm with Penguin Random House, but whether it's Simon Schuster, Hachette, or Public Affairs, one of the other major publishers, they only go to a few printers. One of them had gone bankrupt in the course of the pandemic because businesses were failing. They were still operating, but they were obviously constrained to some extent. And the other problem, and this is, Kathleen would know this as someone who's not just with the library, but also in the business. The publishing industry is a little bit like the fashion industry. You have a spring season and a fall season. Books can come out at any time, but they're kind of bunched into those 2 seasons. The spring season are your summer books, your beach reads, your mysteries and all that. The fall season is geared to the Christmas market, and that could be everything from coffee table books to biographies and history, or things that people want to buy, but maybe they want to give them as gifts. Well, what happened was the spring season was wiped out. It was that was the worst of the first wave of the pandemic. The bookstores were closed, libraries were closed. Things just couldn't get done. So those books were pushed off to the fall. But at the same time, the fall season went ahead as planned, and I was queued up for the fall season. Well, this was a train wreck because all of a sudden you had twice as many books as normal, all bunched into a very short period of time. And the printers just said, we can't handle it. They were started triaging, saying, well, we'll do this one, but we can't do these others. The publishers intervened and said, sorry, if there's going to be triage, we'll do it. We'll tell you what books to go ahead with, which books not. But there was another factor, which of course was the election. And there were a ton of books that were purely political. I love Trump, I hate Trump, Democrats, Republicans, take your pick. But those books were going to be irrelevant the day after the election. They were only going to find their audience before the election. So the agents and the authors in the spring season were screaming the loudest because they wanted their money. The political books were screaming because they had to get out before the election. I was neither one. I was on the fall list and I wasn't political. So I got bumped to January. But there's always a silver lining. I said to my publisher, well, okay, I'll tell you what, I'm okay with the January date, but you have to let me revise it. You have to let me update it because we have a little more time, which I did. So I was able to include events that happened as late as October, which for a book coming out in January is pushing it. But what that means is the book is very fresh, even though it's January now. The book is something, might have been written yesterday because we were able to bring the story all the way forward to the fall. But the other thing is that, and I said this in the book, it's typical in pandemics of this type for there to be a second wave or a third wave. And when I wrote it in the spring, I said, watch out for a second wave in the fall. And that's exactly what we got. And the second wave was 10 times worse by some measures than the first wave. So all of a sudden the book's coming out in January, but the interest had not been diminished at all. As a matter of fact, people were more concerned about the virus, more concerned about the economic aspects. So it found its audience. So it wasn't the kind of creative process where, you have an idea and you have an outline and you talk to your publisher and you go back and forth and you can spend 6 months or a year or whatever working on it. This was much more compressed, much more timely. But the good news is I knew exactly what to write. We were going to talk about the pandemic and the depression. So it was a little faster and more compressed than my other books, but I think that was a good thing because we were able to focus and really find the audience.
Right. Okay, interesting. So it kind of brings me on to my next question. The time you wrote the book, the first part of it was May, June time, updated up to October. Early on in the book, you mentioned that no vaccine had been created. Subsequently, we have some form of vaccine, which is being rolled out across the world, which is fantastic.
Right.
What impact do you see that having on the predictions that you made in the book, if any?
Relatively little. The vaccine is good news. It's just, it's a miracle that it got done. And you go back to June and July, nobody thought the vaccine could be done by October, November. The experts were saying, early 2021 would be amazing, late 2021 more likely.
Right.
In fact, the pharmaceutical companies got that vaccine done by October. It wasn't announced until early November, but they had it in the bag. So that's incredible. And then but the other issues, which are, well, how can you produce it? Well, they went ahead and produced the vaccine before they had FDA approval.
Right.
They had some financial backing, but they went out on a limb a little bit. So they produced, hundreds of millions of doses before it was even approved, expecting that it would be approved, which it was. But then you have a logistical issue. How do you get it out to the places where people need to get the injection, or as they say in England, the jab?
The jab.
I like the jab. I like the jab a little bit better. It's a good word. And President Trump selected a 3-star general who was a logistics genius and put him in charge of it. So your job is to get this out where it needs to go. You're not a doctor, just get this thing delivered. And what a lot of people don't realize is the vaccine has to be kept in a deep freeze, about 100 degrees below zero. And they can do that. There are logistics for that. But a lot of Americans were, and I don't doubt some of the audience were complaining, that some of the Christmas presents and Christmas cards were not arriving in time for Christmas. Well, there was a reason for that, which is this general commandeered the United States Postal Service, took over the whole thing and used it to get the vaccine where it needed to go. But from there, it broke down. When it got to the point of delivery, when it got to our public health system, hospitals, clinics, et cetera, the experience was very varied. New York, which was one of the worst hit, completely bungled it for a number of reasons. One, just normal bureaucratic red tape, inefficiency, the sort of thing you associate with New York, unfortunately. But there was more to it than that. And by the way, I would say the same thing about California and some other locations. They injected a kind of social justice component into this. And if you think about it, you say, well, who should get the vaccine first? That should be the easiest question in the world to answer, which is frontline medical workers, so doctors, nurses, paramedics, anyone assisting in an operating room, clinicians, they should get it first because they have to treat the people who are ill. And the second group would be the ones most vulnerable. We know who that is, over 65 with comorbidities, so asthma, obesity, diabetes, pulmonary disease, people in nursing homes. So healthcare workers and those most vulnerable from a medical point of view clearly should have been first. That should have been an easy decision. But the political element comes in. I say, and by the way, one of the things I say in the book is that the virus is not a Republican or a Democrat. The virus just wants to kill you. That's all you need to know. The virus wants to kill you, and get the politics out of it and treat it as science and medicine and logistics, et cetera. But depoliticize. Unfortunately, that's not the case. It has been highly politicized for not very good reasons. But that said, New York said, well, we've got to deliver this vaccine to communities that have been historically disadvantaged or underserved in some way. Well, it's unfortunate that communities have been disadvantaged and underserved, and maybe you ought to do something about that. But the time and effort it took to get the vaccine to some people who actually didn't need it, actually were not particularly vulnerable, not particularly susceptible to it more than anybody else, prevented it from getting where it needed to go, which are the most vulnerable people and the healthcare workers. New York was actually flushing some of the vaccine down the toilet or down the drain, so to speak. I'm sure it was disposed of properly, but the point being, they were defrosting it. But when you unfreeze it, it's like a quart of milk. You got to use it in a couple of days or it goes bad. And it was going bad. So on the one hand, Governor Cuomo's screaming, I need more doses. But the answer is, well, Governor Cuomo, why are you flushing doses down the drain that you couldn't get delivered because you're so inefficient? West Virginia did a good job. South Dakota did a good job. Some of the states have done better jobs than others. So the vaccine is a big deal, but it will have relatively little impact on the economy. The idea that we'll get what's called herd immunity, which is if enough people are infected,
Right.
if you can't catch it twice and you had it and you survived, you're immune basically because you have the antibodies. And if you get the vaccine, you have the antibodies. As the vaccinated group expands and as the people who have the disease and survive expands, which it is, eventually you'll get to the point where the virus can't infect anybody else. And what happens, the way the virus works, by the way, scientists don't even know if a virus is alive or not. There's no consensus on that. It's a thing. We can describe it. We can find it under an electron microscope. The way it works is it jumps to a healthy body. It finds a healthy cell. It invades the cell, takes over the genetic mechanism and replicates the cell, and then bursts the cell and then spreads, 10,000 times more virus units, and then they go to other people and do the same thing. So that's kind of how the contagion works. But if you hop from one person to another and that person has the antibodies, the virus is stuck. It doesn't have anywhere else to go. But if you find enough people like that, eventually that's how this thing dies out. The virus isn't going away, not anytime soon, but the impact of the virus could diminish greatly because of what I'm describing. But that said, that takes time. It takes time to actually get that level of immunity. We're at a point now, but the idea that you would get there, and this will be late 2021, early 2022. So maybe there'll come a time, and it might be a year from now, when we can all go out to restaurants. We're not wearing masks. We can go to football games and fill up the stands and all that. But the idea that the economy is somehow going to come roaring back, that we'll be back where we were in late 2019, is not true. The effects of the pandemic on the economy will actually be intergenerational. This is more like the Great Depression, and I mentioned this in the book. We all lived through the 2008 great financial crisis, global financial crisis. 1998, there was a financial crisis with Russia and hedge fund long-term capital management. I had a role in that. You can look at individual, 2000, the dot-com crash, everyone remembers that. What's going on now does not compare to any of those. They may be recent, they may be, something we lived through and understand well, but it doesn't compare to that. You have to go back to the Great Depression of the 1930s to find something comparable to what we're going through right now. So vaccine is good news. It's getting out there. I should drop one footnote though. There's one wild card in this whole thing, which is something called mutational escape. Mutational escape is when the viruses mutate. That's normal. Many of the mutations are harmless in the sense that the particular gene, particular part of the genome that mutates doesn't have any impact on infection or fatality. So it's, as I said, it's harmless. But some of the mutations do, and they have to be studied and they have to be looked at one by one. So far, there have been some recent mutations. One is the South African strain or variant. Words are kind of interchangeable. There's a Kent strain from Kent, England. And a new Los Angeles strain. I find it curious that we're not allowed to say Wuhan virus, but we can say Kent, South Africa, and California for some reason. Of course, it did come from Wuhan. But so far, it's early days, but so far it looks like the vaccines work against these variants. But it's still not 100% clear. Beyond that, could there be or would there be another mutation that basically does an end run around the vaccines? And that's what the virus is trying to do. The virus is trying to survive, if you want to put it that way. And so it keeps changing. So if it's a harmless change or not changed enough soon enough, the virus will get under control. But if the virus does mutate in such a way that the vaccines don't work, the antibodies don't work, then we could be in for a whole nother wave of this. I'm not predicting that. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but it's something you have to just bear in mind. So we'll get this under control probably late this year, early next year, absent the kind of mutational escape that I've described. But the idea that the economy is going to come roaring back is just not true.
Right. Okay. So I've heard people refer to you as Mr. Doom and Gloom with your outlook in terms of economic projections. When you're writing books, obviously nobody intends to write things on a negative footing.
Right.
Explain a little bit about how you reach the conclusions and opinions you do.
Right. Thank you. Well, yeah, people do say doom and gloom. It could be the titles in my books, The Death of Money, The Road to Ruin, The New Great Depression. Not exactly cheery titles, but I don't think of myself that way. Just personally, at a personal level, I think of myself as an optimist.
Well, no, I mean, I certainly don't think of you in that way either, but it's interesting to see some of the comments that people might write on book reviews.
Right.
And, I do wonder whether they read them properly, but that's, by the by. It is a comment that I've seen made.
Right.
An inaccurate one to,
Yeah, well, that's absolutely right. And book reviews are one thing, but I'm very active on Twitter, so I might get 200 of those a day. So I'm very used to that. People want to take shots. People want to put words in your mouth, and that's just, you can't hold yourself out to the public or be a writer and not expect to have that kind of comment. I don't think of myself as a doom and gloom person. I don't think of myself as an optimist or a pessimist. I think of myself as a realist.
Right.
So I use analytical methods. They're very well developed. I have my own proprietary models. I gather as much data as I can. The models that I use are very different from what Wall Street uses. So sometimes I reach different conclusions. We actually often reach different conclusions. But my point being, if I have a negative forecast, it's not because I'm a pessimist or I celebrate doom and gloom. It's because that's where the information points. That's where the data and the facts point.
So it's based upon fact and research.
Correct. And
Right.
so my role is to just tell it like it is.
Right.
And I'm not a stockbroker. I'm not a wealth manager. I'm not charging anyone a commission.
Mhm.
But I am a writer and I am an analyst. And what the audience appreciates is somebody who doesn't have all this complex. I mean, I've written other books about gold, for example. And one of the criticisms is, well, you're just talking about gold because you're trying to sell gold. No, I'm not.
Mhm.
I'm not a gold dealer. If you buy gold, fine. If you don't buy it, fine. I don't make any money one way or the other. I don't get a commission. I manage my own portfolio, but I'm not
Well, we'll
selling.
come on to that in a little while.
I'm not selling anything to
Right.
anybody else. But if I have a certain view on it, I'll tell it like it
Right.
is. And that's what goes on in this book. Let me just give you a very concrete example of that. So there was a study, a good one. I read it. It's in the book. By the way, the book has about 200 endnotes. And as much as I'm pretty shameless about promoting the book, that's what authors do, or they should do. I would say it's worth the price of the book just to get those endnotes. Hopefully, everyone would enjoy the whole book. But the research that went into it and all the citations, as I was writing, I knew I was saying a number of controversial things, but I backed it up with primary sources, peer-reviewed papers by PhD epidemiologists, virologists in respected journals, whether it was the Lancet or the New England Journal of Medicine, Journal of the American Medical Association.
I think it would be fair to say if
etc.
you didn't say anything controversial, some of your readers would be a little disappointed.
Well, that's right. They kind of look for that, but
Right.
but hopefully I backed it up. But I said, look, if you want to argue with something I said, that's fine. But go argue with the person who wrote the paper because there's your evidence.
Mhm.
In one of the papers I read, that was a great piece of research that I included in the book, was written by an economist at the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco and two academic colleagues, I believe from the University of California, but they were highly ranked academics. And they looked at every pandemic in the last 650 years with 100,000 or more fatalities.
Right.
So that was their baseline, that was their frame. And I often criticize researchers who do time series, and they say, well, I've got a 1-year time series or a 2-year time series. I usually throw those in the garbage. I go, that's not long enough to draw any really meaningful conclusions. But 650 years, that's enough for me.
That's a period.
But that goes back to the 1350s to the Black Death.
Right.
And so they looked at every pandemic with 100,000 or more fatalities since the Black Death of the 1350s. And they identified 15. And the two worst were the Black Death, about 75 million people died,
Mhm.
and the Spanish flu of 1918, in which about 100 million people died.
Right.
The COVID pandemic is going to end up number 3 on that list. It wasn't when I found the paper, it was number 5 or 6.
Right.
But looking at the fatality rate, I projected at the time, I
Mhm.
said, that's going to end up number 3, and it has. Today, there are about 2.4 million fatalities. The number 4 on the list was the Asian flu of 1958, in which there were 2 million fatalities.
Right.
There was a Russian pandemic, Russian origin pandemic in the 1890s, which also had 2 million fatalities. And then beyond that, it gets down to 1 million, then the 100,000 category. So first of all, COVID wound up being the 3rd worst pandemic in terms of fatalities in 650 years.
Right.
That's what we're dealing with. But what they discovered, these were economists, not virologists, not epidemiologists, but they had the epidemiological data. And what they discovered was, because the question everyone has is, when do we get back to normal? When is this behind us, and when do we get back to normal?
Right.
And there are 2 answers, 2-part answer to that. Number 1, we're not getting back to normal. There's
The new normal.
We will survive. We will get through it. Life will go on, but it will not be the way it was.
Right.
The world we left behind in 2019, we will not see again in our lifetimes. It'll be a different world because of the impact of the pandemic and because of the adaptations that people have. But what they discovered was that if you want to use numeric normality, if you want to call it that it takes 30 years.
Mhm.
Not 30 weeks, not 30 months, but 30 years. That's how long this will be with it. And just to give some anecdotal evidence to back that up, two pieces. One very specific. In 1929, at the start of the Great Depression, the stock market crashed and it hit bottom in June of 1932. In those 3 years, from 1929 to 1932, the stock market went down 89.2%. So 90% for round number. That's what a stock market crash looks like.
Right.
Not what we had last March. That was about 32%. So down 89.2%. But that took 3 years. But the question is, well, when did it get back to the old high? From the bottom, when did it get back to the 1929 high?
Mhm.
The answer is 1954. It took 25 years to make up the lost ground, to regain the old level. Now, it doesn't mean you couldn't make money. If you bought at the bottom in 1932, good for you.
Yeah, right.
There were always ways to make money, but it took 25 years to regain the old high.
Mm.
I grew up in the 1950s and the 1960s. I remember I did not live through the Great Depression, but my parents did. And my grandparents did.
Right.
And I was raised with a kind of a Depression era mentality, even though the 50s and 60s were a fairly prosperous time in the United States. Things were great economically, but we had a Depression mentality. What does that mean? Well, when the newspaper boy dropped the newspaper on the lawn, you'd run out, you would take the rubber band off and save it. You put it in a jar. This is why I throw away a rubber band. My brothers and I would go out with wagons, red wagons in our neighborhood, and go from door to door and collect newspapers in tin cans. We weren't doing it for environmental reasons. Maybe it was good for the environment, but we were recycling. Those tin cans could be used, melted down, and used to make battleships or airplanes, etc. So my point is, even in a period of prosperity, our behavior reflected the frugality and the prudence, if you will, of the Depression. It wasn't really until the late 1960s when the baby boom came of age, and then it was credit cards and mortgages and partying and consumption and all the rest. Then, yeah, it did change, but that took 30 years from the 1930s to the 1960s. And that's what the research shows. And my expectation is that what we've just gone through in 2020, it will affect our behavior into the 2040s. Jay Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, he'll give a speech and say, well, we are not raising interest rates till 2023. I said, Jay, why don't you try 2043? Because that might be what you're looking at. And so that doesn't mean that there's no growth. It doesn't mean that we're all living in hovels or, gathering firewood to keep warm. It doesn't mean that.
So we shouldn't be expecting this V-shaped recovery that everybody's hoping for. Correct.
That's a very succinct way to put it. There is no V-shaped recovery. We'll recover. There'll be growth, but it won't be the same. And this is just showing up in the data. Savings rates were sky high. What good does it do to print money if people save it? Savings is a good thing,
right,
for an individual, but collectively, it's a horrible thing because we're a consumption-driven economy. So if people are saving more, which they are, and that's what the data shows. That means if you save $1, you're not spending $1. Well, how do you drive a consumer-driven economy if people are not consuming?
Right.
The answer is you can't.
Right. Which kind of brings me on to another slightly off-book topic, but something which I think is slightly relevant to what you've been talking about. In the last week or so, we've seen a lot of information about GameStop.
Right.
And the manipulation or potential manipulation of the markets.
Right.
What's your view on that in terms of its overall effect on the economy going forward?
Not much effect on the economy, but a potentially big effect on the stock market and securities trading. And that points to, it's a great question, it points to a distinction between the economy on the one hand and the financial world on the other.
Which are not linked.
Which are not always linked, not directly linked. That's right. And so, for example, a financial crisis and an economic crisis are two different things. We're in an economic crisis right now. The worst impact has been on small and medium-sized businesses. So restaurants, bars, dry cleaners, nail salons, gas stations, boutique shopping, et cetera. They're the ones who have been hammered by the lockdowns. Nobody locked down Amazon.
Right.
Nobody locked down Netflix. In fact, they're thriving because
that's all there is to do.
That's all there is to do. That's right. I moved house recently, and now I bought a new TV and was in Best Buy, big box electronics store. And I was chatting with the salesman. I said, "How's business?" And he said, "Never better. Everyone's buying TVs, stereos, sound bars, iPhone, whatever, because nobody's going out. Everyone's staying home. They want to improve their entertainment systems." Well, that makes perfect sense. But so a big chunk of the economy has been relatively unaffected by the pandemic, and is actually, Amazon, Netflix, they're all thriving. But people kind of look down their nose at small businesses, and so a restaurant closes and you say, "Well, you got 20 waiters and bartenders and cashiers or whatever. What's the big deal?" Well, I think it's a big deal. Those individuals who are out of work think it's a big deal. The owner thinks it's a big deal. But what people don't realize is that those businesses individually may be small, but collectively, small and medium-sized business make up 50% of all jobs in the United States. 50%, 50, and 45% of GDP, gross domestic product. So when you hammer small business, you're hammering half the economy.
Right.
How do you crush half the economy and not have a recession? Well, we had one already. We came out of it in spring, in the summer, but we may be going back into a second recession right now, because of the lockdowns that resulted from the third wave of the virus, which was, as I say, by some measures, 10 times worse than what we went through last March.
I mean, I've heard you talk of velocity within the economy. Maybe you could just explain a little bit, because I think that's tied in very much to what you're describing right there. Right.
So I've given some outline of how the economy's been crushed, how small, medium-sized businesses suffered the most. The stock market has never been more detached from the real economy. The stock market's here, the real economy is down here. Now, I always say in the long run, reality wins, so the stock market will come down like that, but not yet. And I wouldn't go out and short it, because it's like standing in front of an 18-wheeler going 70 miles an hour and saying, "Stop, stop, there's a cliff ahead." No, you're going to get run over. That doesn't do much good. But the real economy is suffering. But people say, "Well, okay, got it. But the Federal Reserve is printing trillions of dollars," which they are, and the Congress is approving trillions of dollars of relief money in various forms, which they are. That's all true. And at the beginning of the pandemic, the Federal Reserve balance sheet was about $3.5 trillion. Today, it's about $7.5 trillion. So they have, in fact, printed $4 trillion of new money in the past year. And it's all publicly available information. It's all transparent. The budget, the United States budget deficit, the baseline budget pre-pandemic, forget pandemic and relief or anything of the kind, pre-pandemic was $1 trillion deficit in fiscal 2020 and $1 trillion deficit in fiscal 2021. So we had $2 trillion of more debt just normally, before the pandemic. Well, since then, the Congress in March, April, May of last year approved $3 trillion of additional spending, deficit spending. And then in December, there was a $900 billion bill just before Christmas, so almost $1 trillion. And the Biden administration is pushing, and they will get another approximately $2 trillion of spending coming up probably in the next 30 days. So put that all together, you're talking about $6 trillion of COVID relief on top of $2 trillion. I've had to train myself to say trillion. I used to say billion, but now we're into the T's. So you're talking $8 trillion of deficit spending in the last fiscal year and this fiscal year because of COVID, and $4 trillion of Fed money printing. Wow. So people look at that and say, well, that solves the problem. The Fed's pushing out all this money, interest rates are zero, here comes government spending, everyone's getting a check. That'll stimulate the economy and it'll all be good. Not true. The spending part is true. The printing part is true. The new money is there. People are getting checks. That's happening. The deficit spending is happening, but none of it will act as a stimulus. Meaning, stimulus means that you're going to do something that's going to cause something else. You're going to start a process. So you light a match and you start a bonfire, or you get a small chain reaction and you set off a nuclear bomb. That's a stimulus. But what's happening is the government is spending the money and printing the money, and they push it out. It has that much impact, but no more. In other words, it has not been able to jumpstart the economy. It has not been able to stimulate something beyond itself, other than just passing out checks. Number one. Number two, the checks themselves, people they got their $600 checks before, before New Year's. They'll be getting a $1,400 check sometime in the next, 60 days, let's say. What are they doing with the money? They're saving it. They're putting it in the bank, or they're paying down debt, which economically is the same thing as saving. When you pay down debt, you're not spending new money. You're just reducing your balance sheet. You're paying off an old liability. So, or they're saving it. Well, if you've lost your job or your business is shut down, that makes good sense. Of course, you're not taking your buddies out to dinner. You're saving your money. Well, that's smart. But even if you haven't lost your job, odds are maybe your spouse lost her job. Maybe your neighbor lost a job, or pardon me, or maybe you're just concerned that you'll lose your job next week. You still have your job, but say, hey, maybe I'm next in line. And those people are saving. The economists call that precautionary savings. Plain English, you're saving for a rainy day, except it looks like it's raining. So the point is, the money's going out the door, but it's being saved or being used to pay down bills, which is just reducing your balance sheet. It's not being spent. That gets into the concept of velocity. Velocity sounds like a technical term in monetary economics. It probably is, but what it means is the turnover of money. So let me just give a simple example. So let's say I do go out for dinner and I tip the waiter, and the waiter takes the money and takes a taxi home and tips the taxi driver, and the taxi driver takes the tip money and buys gasoline for his car. Well, in that example, my dollar has velocity of 3. It supported $3 of goods and services: the waiter tip, the taxi tip, and the gasoline. But instead, let's say I stay home and watch television and don't spend any money. In that example, my money has velocity of 0. I didn't spend it. So, and GDP, gross domestic product, in nominal terms, total dollars of goods and services in the economy, is a very simple equation. It's money supply times velocity. How much money is there? How fast does it turn over? And multiply one by the other, and that gives you GDP. And I remind people, I say, you don't need integral calculus for this. 5th grade math will do just fine. $7 trillion times 0 is 0. Meaning, if you don't have velocity, you don't have an economy. And that's the problem today. Right. So all the money printing in the world will not get the economy going, will not cause inflation, by the way, as long as velocity is declining. And velocity is declining. These things are not opaque. Again, it's all publicly available information. We have the data. That's why I say we don't have to guess about this stuff. We have the information. You just have to understand the dynamics. Right. So money printing will not stimulate the economy because velocity is declining, because people are saving the money, not spending it. And again, this is in the data. The savings rate is around 14%. Last April, it was 24%. And as late as May, it was 17%, still around 13%. Normal savings rate in the United States is about 5%. 8% is considered high. As I say, we're at 13%, and we've been very high. Pardon me, been higher recently. Now, what about the deficit spending? Okay, forget the money supply, forget the Federal Reserve. What about the Congress spending $8 trillion? Surely that helps. The answer is it doesn't. Pardon me, and here's why. Up until there's a ratio. It's like, how much debt do you have versus how big is the economy? It's the debt to GDP ratio. So take the national debt, divide it by GDP, gross domestic product, and that ratio is your debt to GDP ratio. Up to about up to 90%. This is what the research shows. So your debt is 90% of your GDP. Up to that level, there's some positive, what's called Keynesian multiplier. Well, what is that? What it says is that if you borrow $1, you're the government, you borrow $1, you spend $1, you can get $1.20 of GDP or $1.10 of GDP. In other words, you can get more GDP than the amount you borrowed and spend because of velocity, because the dollar you spend, that goes to somebody, they spend it on something else, they spend it on something else, and you get the velocity as we described, and it stimulates the economy. Right. But at 90% debt to GDP, a funny thing happens. You go through the looking glass, and people, as I say, you don't need a PhD in economics. People look at that and say, I don't know how this is going to work out. but the debt's too high. And either you're going to default on the debt, or there's going to be inflation because you got to melt the debt by making the money worth less, or you're going to raise taxes. But one of the, you're either going to default, inflate, or raise taxes. They're all bad in different ways. And so I better save more and spend less to prepare for this crack up that's coming.
Okay.
Well, what is the US debt to GDP ratio? The answer is that when Trump came into office in 2017, it was 106%. So way past the 90%.
Right.
Today, it's about 130%. Because the numerator shrank because of the recession, and the denominator shrank because of the recession, and the numerator expanded because of all the new debt.
Right.
So now the ratio is 130%, way past the 90. Well, who's at that lunch table? Well, the answer is Lebanon, Greece, and Italy, and the United States. They're the four countries that are in that category. All the super debtors, lunch table, if you will. And
not good company.
Not good company, and more to the point, you borrow a dollar and you spend a dollar, you get 90 cents of GDP. You don't even get your dollar back. So monetary policy will not work because of velocity, because the savings rate is so high. And fiscal policy, deficit spending, will not work because the debt to GDP ratio is so high. And again, people prepare for the worst and they save and they don't spend. So are we doing these things? Yes. Are we printing money? Yes. Are we spending money to the tune of trillions of dollars in deficits? Yes. But none of it will work. And that's why the economy, and that's very consistent with this 650-year time series I described, which says it takes 30 years to dig out.
Yeah. I mean, I could sit here and talk to you all evening about this. I'm conscious that there may be a number of questions which have come in during a sort of 45-minute conversation. Kathleen, I have a ton of additional questions, but obviously I'm happy to hand it back to yourself if you have questions which have come in.
Okay. Let me take some that have come in. The first one is regarding gold. What do you think of the quote, "Gold price has zero impact in currencies when you do not use the gold standard"? Since the world decided to give up the gold standard in 1944 in the Bretton Woods Agreement, and he would like an answer.
Well, just to kind of, I understand the question, just to set a couple of facts straight. 1944 was the year that we started the gold standard, or the modern gold standard. It ended in 1971 when President Nixon said that we would no longer redeem dollars for gold from our foreign trading partners. So it was around from 1944 to 1971, had been around for centuries or even millennia before that. The problem is we gave up the gold standard. Okay, why does the United States Treasury still have 8,000 tons of gold? Why does the International Monetary Fund still have approximately 2,000 tons of gold? Why has Russia been buying gold for the past 10 years to the point where gold now composes 20% of their total reserve position? Why has China been buying gold as fast as they can find it, doing it surreptitiously and non-transparently, and keeping it off the books? So officially, are we on a gold standard? No. But central banks are net buyers. The United States hasn't sold any significant amount of gold since 1980. So I would say we're still on a gold standard. It's just not something that is fixed. So it's a shadow gold standard, if you want to think of it that way. Now, as far as gold not being a currency because somebody says so, I think you have to judge people's actions. The fact is, I think of gold as a form of money. So the dollar is a form of money, the euro is a form of money, the Japanese yen is a form of money, and gold is a form of money. It happens to be a form of money that central banks don't like to talk about. If you had the printing press, why would you want to talk about gold? You'd want to talk about your nice printing press. Why would the Federal Reserve, which has the ability to create dollars out of thin air, which they do, and as I mentioned, they created 4 trillion new dollars in the past year, why would they want to have any recognition of gold if that would dilute or diminish their, their handle on the crank, so to speak, their ability to print the dollars? The answer is they wouldn't. But if you look behind the scenes, you have these questions that I raised. Why Why are central banks net buyers? Why are major countries acquiring gold? Iran, Turkey, again, China and Russia, I already mentioned, Philippines, Vietnam, Kazakhstan, they're all increasing their gold reserves. So what I tell people is that even if countries are not on the gold standard, and they're not, that is correct, you can go on a personal gold standard. You can acquire gold. I recommend a 10% allocation, not 50%, not 100%. I've never said, sell everything and buy gold. Again, that's people attribute that to me. They want to put words in your mouth. But I do recommend a 10% allocation to physical gold. It serves you very well in inflation, and inflation will come. It won't come soon, by the way. Maybe a year or more away, but it will come hard and fast, and gold will preserve wealth in that environment. In the short run, at least, deflation is a greater danger. And people say, well, why would I want gold in deflation? The fact is, the period 1929 to 1933 was the longest sustained period of deflation in US history, and gold went up 75% in dollar terms. It went from $20 an ounce to $35 an ounce. So the fact of the matter is, gold obviously does well in inflation. People have an intuitive feel for that, but gold does very well in deflation also. And I talk about this in the conclusion of my book. I explain why in a strong deflationary episode, which we may get, the question confronting central bankers and the Congress and the White House, for that matter, is how do you get out of deflation? It was the same question that confronted Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1933. And his answer was to raise the price of gold. Not to do a favor for gold investors, but to raise the price of everything else. Because a higher, $5,000 an ounce gold means $400 a barrel oil, $100 an ounce silver, $20 wheat, et cetera. You raise the price of gold to raise the price of everything else, to break the back of deflation and cause inflation, which is the way out of the debt crisis. So, I run into people, they say, Jim, you have some money in gold. How do you sleep at night? And I say, you're 90% in the stock market. How do you sleep at night?
All right, another question. What do you think the team inspecting Wuhan will find?
I explained in the book how the virus escaped from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. The evidence was very good when I wrote that chapter. This is chapter 1 of the book. The evidence was very good when I wrote it last spring, kind of in the May-June timeframe. Since then, the evidence is even greater. There's been some declassified US intelligence. There have been some, I want to call them whistleblowers. There were people who are top Chinese scientists who have defected at the risk of their lives, who have attested to this. Now, if you ask me what I think this group that's in the Wuhan Institute today, Wuhan Institute of Virology today, will find, my answer is nothing, because they're sock puppets for the Chinese. This is a WHO delegation. The WHO is the World Health Organization. They're under the thumb of the Chinese. They've lied repeatedly. Remember, they were the ones, this is all in the book, they were the ones who said last January that there was no evidence of human-to-human transmission. This was at a time when they were scraping bodies off the streets in Wuhan. The WHO says there's no human-to-human transmission. That was an outright lie. They praised the efforts of the Chinese. That was propaganda. The head of the WHO is actually a Ethiopian neo-Marxist revolutionary. I have nothing against Ethiopia. I haven't been there. I hear it's a beautiful country, but I think I know a neo-Marxist revolutionary when I see one. So that's the head, Dr. Tedros. He's the head of this. By the way, he's not a doctor of epidemiology or medicine or anything we're talking about. And they picked an American in the delegation. The American member of the delegation is on the payroll of the Chinese. He's already said publicly that the leak from the lab theory was a conspiracy theory. When someone says conspiracy theory, I know that they're not seriously engaging in the debate. It's just an all-purpose way to shut somebody down, but I'm not so easily shut down, and neither are others who are taking a brave stand. Australia called for an independent investigation, a true international independent investigation, not run by the WHO, which was a brave act. I've actually done quite a few interviews with an Australian audience recently, and I've said, my compliments to Australia for standing up and showing some integrity and bravery here. For that, they got a full-on trade war with China. China stopped buying Australian wine, Australian coal, other natural resource exports. They're doing everything they can to punish the Australian economy. Why? I mean, if you have nothing to hide, why are you declaring a flat-out trade war on one of your major trading partners? The answer is they have a lot to hide. So the evidence is clear that it did come from the laboratory. The wet market theory is nonsense. But this delegation will find nothing because that's their job.
Thank you. Here's another question. What are your views on cryptocurrencies?
Well, let's define cryptocurrencies. There are about 2,000 of them the last time I looked. I'm going to assume, without knowing, that the questioner is thinking about Bitcoin, and there are a couple others, Ripple, Ethereum, that are high priced. They're not worth anything, but they're out there. But at the same time, there's a very strong movement coming very quickly for central bank cryptocurrencies. I like to say the dollar is the most successful cryptocurrency of all time. The last time the United States Treasury issued a paper treasury bond was 1980. The dollar has been, now you might have a couple dollars in your pocket or your purse. In Philadelphia, we call it walking around money. Yeah, we all have a couple bucks in our pockets, but that's a tiny, tiny fraction of all the dollars that exist, and the overwhelming majority of them are in digital form in a computer controlled by the United States Treasury and the Federal Reserve. All the message traffic is encrypted. So that's the ultimate cryptocurrency right there. It may not be a blockchain, but it is what it is. But central banks around the world are working on central bank cryptocurrencies. But it'll be a digital euro, a digital dollar, a digital yen, a digital Chinese yuan, perhaps, using blockchain technology. But it'll still be a dollar, a euro, a yen, or a 1 yuan. The currency won't change, but the form of it will change. And what's the point of that? The point is to eliminate cash. So there is no more cash. Everything's digital. We're almost there. You've got your credit card, your debit card. You get your paycheck by wire transfer, Apple Pay, etc. But if you wanted to impose negative interest rates, so you put $100,000 in the bank and the interest rate is -1. You go away for a year and you come back, you have $99,000. They took $1,000 out of your bank account in my example. That's what a negative interest rate is. Central banks want to go in that direction. Well, there's a very simple solution to that, which is you go down to the bank, you take your 100,000 out, in cash, paper notes, and you put it in a safe place, and you come back a year later, you still have $100,000. You're ahead of the guy who got the negative interest rate. Well, how do you, if you're the government, how do you defeat that? The answer is get rid of cash. So I always say, if you're going to slaughter pigs, you got to herd the pigs into a pen, then get them into a chute, and then take them into the slaughterhouse. Well, if you're going to slaughter savers with negative interest rates and confiscation and account freezes and withholding taxes and everything else, you got to get them into this digital pen, which means no cash. That we're almost there in China. By the way, it's an excellent surveillance tool. We already have facial recognition software. They can already track your whereabouts with your iPhone or your what's the Samsung or Android or whatever, because of GPS. So they already know your whereabouts and they know your preferences. But this would just be one more thing where if all of your shopping were 100% digital, they would know what stores you're in, what you just bought, your whereabouts, etc. And the Chinese are moving very fast in that direction because they are a surveillance state. They're a totalitarian surveillance state. It's just one more way to control the population. So just to kind of sum up, cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin have no use case. They're good for tax evaders, terrorists, and worse. I won't even mention, we all kind of know what goes on in the dark web. It's good for that, but you can't buy a cup of coffee with it. There used to be like one coffee shop in Brooklyn where they took Bitcoin for coffee, but I think it got shut down because of COVID. So I'm not even sure you can buy a cup of coffee with Bitcoin. It's a form of gambling. It's legal. I prefer roulette because you can have a nice drink at the table. But if you want to, in the early 1960s, there was a popular dance song called "Shout, Shout, Knock Yourself Out." And I say, if you want to buy Bitcoin, knock yourself out. But I don't think it has any long-term value. And if you wanted a non-cash asset that would preserve wealth, I would recommend gold.
Oh, thank you. I have one more or two more questions. One is, how long do you think the S&P can keep rising?
That's a great question. First of all, when people say the S&P, of course, they mean the S&P 500, which is the leading stock index in the world. When people come home from work or whatever, they might look at the Dow Jones because it's better known. But professional investors, institutional investors, asset allocators, wealth managers, they all use the S&P 500 as the benchmark. But here's the point. The S&P 500 is what's called a cap-weighted index, which means as an individual company or stock, your impact on the index is a function of your market capitalization relative to the total capitalization. Well, there are 7 stocks, and we know what they are, that dominate the index. So it's Apple, Amazon, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Netflix, and Tesla. Those 7 stocks are 40% of the market capitalization of the S&P 500. And they are the least affected by the pandemic. Nobody shut down Apple. Netflix is streaming. Netflix is doing great. Amazon's doing great. People are afraid to go out to a local merchant, but they can go online and get Amazon. So every one of the stocks I mentioned is either a technology company, an entertainment company, a streaming company, or some kind of digital commerce. Nobody shut them down. They're relatively unaffected. In fact, they're thriving. So the S&P 500 is really the S&P 7. The other 493 stocks are flat to down. They're individual stocks that are doing great. So what happens? We're also living in a world of passive investing, index funds, and ETFs. So those stocks go up. People come into an index fund. What does the manager do? You got to buy those stocks to match the index. So they go up some more. More money comes in. They go up some more. More money comes in. They go up some more. So there's definitely a bubble forming. Having said that, and it could go on for a while. The funny thing about bubbles is they go on longer than people expect, and they go on until the last guy or woman throws in the towel. So if you hear Jim Rickards say buy stocks, you know that that's the top of the bubble. It can go no further. But seriously, it has a bubble dynamic. I wouldn't short it because, like I say, you'll get run over. But it is completely detached from reality. It bears no relationship to the underlying economy. It could go on for a while, but it is shaping up as something that could crash pretty sharply in the not too distant future.
Thank you. All right, I'll let you gentlemen go off and have some dinner. I want to remind everyone that this is a taped program, so you'll have an opportunity to see it again or to tell your friends to see it. And also stop by Barrett Books and pick up a copy of the new Great Depression. You will not be disappointed. And thank you, gentlemen, for spending your evening with us. It was great. It was really wonderful.
Thank you, Kathleen.
Bye, everyone.